Hello and welcome back to Simple Time Studios. Once again, we are returning to Ecumenopolis of Mystery, Part 8, The Thrilling Conclusion. Let us begin. Psion Novastar continued to walk along, the waypoints projected on his green smart goggles guiding him through narrow alleys and congested roadways. Slowly he made his way through the endless city. The chronometer in the corner of his goggles heads-up display kept counting the hours and minutes. The only reliable record, with the abandoned city's automated systems confusing the Orion explorer's normal sense of time. The sheer height of the buildings in this region blotted out the sun on the lower levels. If it wasn't for the occasional working streetlight, the stout Ursan field scientist would have been stumbling around in the dark. Even still, there were stretches where the lights had burnt out, and Psion was forced to rely on his map and the light of his solar lamp to navigate his way through. Does Psion encounter anything on the trip over? I'm going to roll for a wandering monster, and a 5 on a d6 says no. Nothing disturbed Psion's slow trek through the Ecumenopolis as the day wore on, and he made his way toward the first stop on his trip back. The Replicator Mall stood in front of him, a massive multi-story shopping complex that was still dwarfed by the gargantuan structure surrounding it. As he arrived outside the entrance, the smart explorer looked around. The lighting in this area had not been destroyed by the ravages of time yet, so only the distant howl of nocturnal predators gave any clue that night had begun to fall. Seeing that he needed to find shelter for the night, Psion entered the abandoned Replicator Mall to hopefully find a place he could hide and set up camp for the night. The notes from other explorers mentioned that the abandoned shopping mall had supplies and a small but functional universal constructor somewhere. Psion could not imagine such technology surviving particularly long without regular maintenance, but he had seen stranger things. Walking through the broken open doors, Psion walked into a long hallway that spanned as long as a few Federation sporting arenas he had seen. Above him, the building stretched a good 20 stories before he spotted a transparent dome ceiling that let the fading sun's light into the mall. Sky bridges connected the upper floors at regular intervals, but were spaced to let the sunlight reach down to the ground floor. Psion thought this was the first time he saw the sun since he left the city park. It was also the only source of light in the building he was quick to notice. Ambling towards the nearest elevator as the light continued to fade, he pressed the call button. No response. No response at all. The power was dead for the entire building, judging by the looks of things. He pulled out his solar lamp again and turned it on. Psion looked at the nearby stairs, noticed they both went down one level and all the way up to the top of the mall. Reviewing his notes on his pocket computer, he went over what was known about the building. Power was dead in the mall, but still flowed in the surrounding area, suggesting the problem was localized. Basement was maintenance and utilities, but no one had begun to explore it yet, nor had anyone explored past the second level. The notes also mentioned strange mechanical noises and an electronic voice rambling nonsense from somewhere roughly halfway up. Psion considered all of this as the sun continued to set outside and the light of his solar lamp the only source of illumination inside the building. He didn't like the idea of going down to the basement where it was even darker, trying to find a breaker to restore power to the building. The stout explorer decided to head upstairs. One flight of stairs, 2 flights. He slowly crept his way up to the 3rd floor of the building to avoid alerting any predators that might have been nesting in his abandoned building. According to the notes, the functional universal constructor was in a shop on the 1st floor. There was nothing of note on the second floor, and there was something that sounded promising as a shelter on the third floor. Everything beyond the third floor was unexplored. Arriving at the third floor landing, Psion checked his notes again and looked around. According to his notes in the map, there were 2 previously discovered locations of interest here. A former medical clinic of some kind that could be easily closed up and used as an overnight shelter, and a store at the opposite end of the thoroughfare from the clinic. Previous explorers were not clear on what they found there, but something clearly startled them because they listed the store as danger, stay away. Curious, but since the entire mall was darker than the void between stars, Psion decided against investigating. Maybe in the morning he would look and see what he could observe, but with the only light coming from his solar lamp, finding shelter was a better choice. Okay. Does Psion encounter anything as he finds his way to the old body modification clinic? I give it a 50-50, and 81 says no, he doesn't. Is the door to the clinic shut and locked? Again, 50-50, and 6 says yes. Is the creature I know is in the abandoned store aware of Psion's presence and is on the prowl? I say it's unlikely. And another 6 says yes, the creature is aware and very much on the prowl. The metal security gate was down and refused to budge when he pulled on it. Locked. As he looked for the mechanism to see if there was something he could disable, Psion Novastar started to smell something. It was a strange smell. Not unpleasant, but definitely not something he expected to be tickling his nose in the middle of an abandoned shopping mall. The smell of sweet starches, like a freshly baked pastry glazed in melted sugar. Psion sniffed the air again as he looked for the mechanism. Where was that smell coming from? It couldn't be from inside the locked clinic. Okay, Psion makes a perception check to detect the source of the smell. 1d4, he gets a 9. He's going to make a second one to find the lock he needs to disable. He gets a 16. Lastly, I'm going to make a mechanics check to jimmy it open with his micro tool. 16 again. The source of the smell was a distant shape moving outside the light of his solar lamp. He couldn't determine what it was or how fast it was moving, but he could make out that it seemed to be heading his way. Finding the lock control was much easier. A simple electromagnetic lock near the bottom middle of the security gate. And disabling it was a case of taking out his micro tool and temporarily breaking the circuit long enough for him to lift it up and close it behind him. The gate closed and locked behind him. Psion slowly backed into the clinic waiting room and switched off his solar lamp. The smell grew stronger as the blob-like shape came closer. The soft sound of something sticky being dragged along the floor could be barely heard as Psion watched the creature come into view. As best as he could tell, the creature was some kind of gelatinous blob. Color and composition were difficult to determine in the darkness, but it was moving faster than he expected. At first he thought the creature was going to slide right on past the clinic's gate, but then the blob shifted direction and pushed against the gate and through it. The creature oozed through the spaces in between the metal links of the security gate and in the cracks between the gate and the awning. Psion continued to step backwards until he backed up against the wall separating the foyer from the rest of the clinic. He knew the only way out of this room was currently blocked by the approaching slime. And now both of them are going to roll initiative. Psion gets a 19 on an unmodified 1d20 roll, and for the slime creature he's fighting, I'm going to use a stat block for the orchard jelly from D&D, which gets a 13 on initiative. Psion goes first. Seizing the initiative, Psion drew his stun pistol and fired at the slimy mass approaching him. Okay, Psion attacks with his low power beamer. He gets a 21 in his attack roll, which hits and does 5 points of damage. The snack slime has 39 HP left. And unfortunately, since it's a large creature, it's not stunned by Psion's weapon. Psion pulled the trigger and fired the weapon directly in front of him. The shot connected and caused the slime to bubble and blacken, but the creature wasn't stunned by his attack. It was simply too large. Squeezing the rest of the way into the room, the brown slime slid towards Psion and attempted to strike him with one of its pseudopods. Okay, the snack slime rolls an unnatural 20 and hits Psion for 11 points of damage, knocking him down to 9 HP and hitting him squarely in the face. I'm going to have him make a constitution check. 1d20 plus 4, and he gets a 6. Okay, so he fails what I was going to have him do, but he does learn something. The slime hit with the strength of a pneumatic hammer as it smacked Psion squarely in the face and sent jolts of pain through his entire body. Yet as it hit him in the face, a chunk of it went into his mouth and touched his tongue. It tasted like a mixture of natural and artificial sugars. On reflex, Novastar attempted to bite the slime and missed. An idea formed in his head. A bad one, but he couldn't think of any good ones right now. With the creature within biting distance and hitting much harder than he expected, Psion leaned forward and attempted to eat the slime. Okay, Psion is going to attempt an endurance check to try and eat the snack slime. He gets a 22 on a 1d20 plus 4. Does this intimidate the creature into retreating? I give it a 50-50. And 22 says yes, it does. Planting his face into the slime and opening his mouth wide, Psion took a deep gulp of the sweet, sticky slime. Then another, and another. After the third gulp, the creature violently retracted and started to squeeze back through the gate. The Urson scientist pulled back, panting as he watched the creature escape. A few minutes later, the fight was over. The slime creature squeezed back through the closed gate and had retreated back to wherever in the mall it had come from. Psion suspected the store he had been warned against was its nest, but he couldn't be sure. The gulps of slime he had consumed had settled into his stomach, squirming in a way that felt more like a tickle than a gut punch from the inside. And the slime creature had left a sticky residue on the security gate that hopefully won't gum up the mechanisms. It would give Psion a clue into the creature's nature, though. Ambling over, Psion scraped a particularly large globule of slime off the gate before retreating deeper into the clinic to temporarily set up his lab equipment and to try to analyze the sample before he called it a night. Okay, Psion is going to make a natural sciences roll to see what he could figure out about the creature and whether or not he made a mistake trying to eat it. 1d20 plus 7 gets him a 15. Well, he learns a couple things about it from initial analysis. Nanites. Edible nanites. The creature was an animated mass of edible nanites that was animating a large mass of carbohydrates and simple sugars. Psion Novastar isolated at least 6 different chemical formulas and can think of a couple different possibilities how this creature came to be. Either it was a mass of microscopic assemblers for a food synthesizer that had since gone rogue due to lack of regular maintenance over the decades of abandonment, or it was once a supply of snack food laced with medical or biomorphic micromachines. There were plenty of examples of both in the Orion Commonwealth. At least his analysis confirmed it wasn't poison and more than made up for the calories he had exerted walking this far. with the rest of the data saved to his pocket computer so he could review and share it later. Psion cleaned up and disassembled his portable laboratory equipment, then tried to sleep in one of the empty examination rooms. Okay. Does Psion experience any strange mental effects from the fungus he was exposed to below the city park? I give it a 50-50, and 21 says yes. Does he hear anything else during the night? Again, 50-50, and 19 says yes. Not a restful night. Shutting the door behind him and trying his best to make himself comfortable, Psion closed his eyes and tried his best to fall asleep. But no sooner had he closed his eyes than he started to dream. He dreamed he was walking an endless hallway, and no matter how far he walked, it always felt like he was standing in one place. Then the endless hallway disappeared out of view with a flash, and he was suddenly wandering a vast vault full of seeds and seedlings sealed away in cryogenic storage. Then he was pulled away again, a vaguely familiar voice laughing in his ears as Psion was pulled out of the seed vault he had failed to find. And then the distant clang of metal on tile brought him back out of his mold-induced dream. His eyelids slowly opening as the sound of metal on tile repeated. Something was stomping around about halfway up the mall, and distant mutterings of a forgotten alien dialect drifted down to Psion's hiding place. Just like the notes had said, Psion strained his ears to pick out a word or two of the alien language that he understood. Must sail. Must store. The mysterious voice muttered high above him. Was it Psion's imagination, or was the voice somewhat electronic? Shaking his head, Psion closed his eyes again and attempted to go back to sleep. The next time he would open his eyes, sunlight started streaming through the skylights above. It was the worst night's sleep he had had in a while. Rising back to his feet, grabbing his gear, and opening the security gate up, the curious explorer looked around at his surroundings before looking up. There were a lot of interesting mysteries here to solve, for both him and other explorers that might come to this planet to see what it has. Perhaps later he would return to explore this building properly and study its mysteries, but he still needed to head back to the research base. Especially after last night. Was the mold affecting his mind, or was it just a dream? Another reason to get back as soon as possible. Climbing downstairs to the main floor and walking out the front entrance, Psion resumed his trek back to the Starport base camp. Okay, does Psion encounter anything dangerous or hostile on the hike to the next stop? Hab Block 51. I give it a 50-50, and 57 says no. He will still encounter a lot of interesting sights, but nothing attacks him. The walk to Hab Block 51 was eventful, but not dangerous. Novastar was still traveling through some of the more densely urbanized parts of the planet, so he continued to walk through a perpetual twilight, with the towering skyscrapers and roadways above him blotting out most of the sunlight. The local wildlife consisted of herbivores that watched him from a distance before prancing off to find foliage elsewhere in the lower levels of the sprawling city. His route took him past a statue made of finely wrought bronzed metals bent into ribbon-like beams, the once polished metal tarnished by decades of grime and neglect. Next was a long line of ground cars, dozens of vehicles abandoned in the middle of a gridlocked roadway, each of them inoperable from age. The atomic clock counting time in the corner of his goggles was once again the only proof of the passage of time as he continued to walk along. The day slowly passing as Psion continued to walk along. As he passed locations of note, he would stop and take pictures of the location or mark them on his map. Soon he arrived at the familiar site of Hab Block 51, the last location between him and the base camp. The first location he explored, and more than likely the safe rooms he found last time he explored would still be there. Was there enough time to push on and make his way back to the spaceport before nightfall? He checked the clock in the bottom of his green smart goggles. Okay, is there enough time to push on? I think it's very unlikely. And the Dice Oracle says no with 35%. Psion spends another night in the ruins. Looking at his clock, he shook his head. No, there wasn't enough time. He was going to have to camp out in that Sol Federation bolt hole in the basement again, unless he wanted to try his luck with one of the abandoned apartments above him. With his solar lamp in hand, Psion descended down to the apartment basement and retraced his steps back to the safe room. Okay, is there anything hostile in the basement? Has the bolt hole been used since Psion visited last? I give both questions a 50-50. I get 70 and 81 respectively on my oracle rolls. So no and no respectively. The local creatures had once again gone out to hunt for the day as Psion continued to amble along towards the Explorer bolt hole in the basement of the habitation block. Walking inside and shutting the door behind him, the smart field researcher looked around and found the dust in the room was largely undisturbed since the last time he visited. Sighing, he cleaned the dust the best he could, then went to sleep. The next morning, Psion woke up and gathered his things before heading out to make the final leg of the trek back to the spaceport. The day passed much like before, and he arrived back at the towering spaceport complex by midday. As soon as he arrived, he reported his findings and exposure to Raven Goldmeadow. He was quickly diagnosed and treated by the camp doctor. Almost immediately, he began to feel the mold's influence on his mind slowly fade. As the medications and nanite infusions began to take effect, Psion and Raven discussed the results of his expedition. So, you searched the tunnels underneath the park and found quite a bit from your report, Raven began as the two of them sat in her office to review his findings. Yes, evidence of biological life and still functional automated systems. I made sure to bring back all the samples I could. I will have to check my ship's stores or fabricate some protective equipment before I go out again. The mold infection should not have happened. I was careless, Psion replied, mentally kicking himself for not being better prepared. Raven grimaced ever so slightly. About going back into the ruins. Unfortunately, I have another favor I need to ask you. The transport that was supposed to come by has seemingly disappeared, and my requests have not been going through. Psion raised an eyebrow at this. I didn't think this sector had a problem with pirates. How does a ship disappear in this part of space? Raven nodded in agreement. I don't know. That's what worries me. But regardless, I need someone to take Stardust back to Stellar Crescent University and deliver our research reports as well as my equipment requests. And you're the only one with a ship. The Ursan explorer nodded reluctantly. He would have rather gone back out surveying more of this planet, but he knew he was the only person that could do this, and the base needed more people and equipment. All right, I'll make preparations for launch. Make sure she's ready to leave by the end of the day, he replied. The meeting was adjourned soon after. Psion got to work getting the insatiable Curiosity ready for launch and uploaded the research data he had collected to the ship's computer. He also made a list of equipment he needed to pick up once he returned to civilization, and a list of friends he could try to contact and see if they were interested in exploring more of this sprawling planet city. Stardust showed up outside the airlock about an hour before Psion was ready to take off. The Lapine computer specialist toyed with a tablet as she dragged along a trunk-sized suitcase behind her. As he opened the airlock to let her in, she shot a look at the airlock camera and boarded the ship. The Ursan explorer shook his head and took off. Once in orbit, Psion Novastar charted a course for Stellar Crescent University and charged his ship's FTL drive. A few minutes later, the insatiable curiosity winked out of existence into the realm where relativity no longer applied. The first jump towards his destination was when it happened. The insatiable curiosity was suddenly and violently torn out of hyperspace. Psion braced himself as the ship shook from the shock of being pulled back into normal space. The lights flickered as the curiosity switched to emergency power. The stout explorer was just about to restart the engine when a message came over the open channel. Audio only. "Well, well, well," a soft and vaguely familiar male voice began, tone dripping with equal parts coyness and malice. "Why, if it isn't the explorer Psion Novastar himself. I'm a big fan of yours. I would love to have you participate in my experiments." The vaguely familiar voice taunted as the hull of the insatiable curiosity vibrated with a metallic clang of docking clamps striking the ship. End of campaign.